I'm sorry it's taken me a few days to get around to my Brexit video, but my teeth were playing me up and I really can't talk properly with a mouthful of achy teeth. But anyway, here we are, better late than never. And what I want to talk about is what my reasons were for voting leave, because yes, I did vote leave and I would do so again. And the reasons aren't primarily around what the government thinks everyone voted about, which is immigration issues. They're not. They're primarily around British patriotism and the Second World War and a whole mishmash of things which I will attempt to explain. But first of all, let's take a look at what it seems that our government wants our country to become. It seems that our country is being turned by our government into this sort of a place. A place where there are angry people of all nationalities who don't integrate with each other, running around, creating problems, and just generally making the whole place a pain to live in. And is this truly what our government wants? It certainly isn't the Britain that I grew up in. The Britain that I grew up in was a country of villages and towns in which everyone was relatively peaceful, cooperated together, and it's a place of great beauty. And I do not like what our government and politicians seem to want to turn our country into. And I felt that I had to do something about it. And there are some worse aspects to the whole European thing, and that is a lack of democracy. Because our laws for the last few years have been made by a faceless committee of bureaucrats in Brussels who are not elected, they're not accountable to anyone, and to be honest, they can do anything they like. Yes, there's a European Parliament, there's various European committees, but at the end of the day, everyone now has lost their veto, which means that the European bureaucrats can push through whatever the hell that they like. Because in order to deny European bureaucracy, you have to get all the other member countries to agree. And every single one of them, it has to be to overrule the bureaucrats, it has to be a unanimous vote. And clearly things are stacked against anyone who wishes to go against the wishes of the bureaucracy. And this is crazy, it's entirely the wrong way round. Europe has a single driving purpose, and that is to make everywhere the same and everywhere a kind of unappetizing mishmash. Let me tell you a little story. When I was a child, I was left alone by my parents. I was aged 8 for about 3 hours. Now this is totally illegal in the UK, but under the circumstances, with my grandmother being rushed to hospital and all the rest of it, they didn't have a lot of choice. And I got very, very hungry while they were away, so I decided that I was going to take all the things that I liked and put them in one dish and eat them, because I knew we had everything I liked. So I took grated cheese, which I loved. I took tomato sauce, which I loved. And I took golden syrup, which I loved. I put them in a pan and mixed them together, sat down and tried to eat it. I had a few mouthfuls and I started feeling very, very ill, and it didn't taste all that nice anyway. So I carefully washed up the pan and hid all evidence that I'd done anything. And then I was sick for 2 days straight. And this is what happens when you take all the things you like and you put them in one place. Very often it's just awful. And this is what Europe are trying to do. They're trying to take everything that they want and put it everywhere. The result is there's no cultural identity, the people have no control over the politics, and it is just absolutely terrible. So that was really my main reason for voting. There's lots of others to do with finance, and I guess my secondary reason was around the European army. If you remember, everyone was saying, oh, there's never ever going to be a European army, it's all just a scare story. Well, now they're talking about it. And can you imagine your son being called up by a faceless, unelected bureaucrat somewhere in Brussels to fight a war which you don't agree with and no one in your entire country agrees with, and dying in that war? That is just appalling. That cannot be allowed to happen, and I believe that that is a major reason why many people voted to leave. And another thing is the whole business of the Second World War. Why did we fight the Second World War? We fought the Second World War to preserve our sovereignty, because we didn't want to be invaded by Germans. Well, looky here, who controls the EU effectively? Chancellor Merkel. So we've given over control of our country to the very people that we fought the Second World War again. And my father would be turning in his grave, you know. I mean, he very nearly lost his life 3 times in that war. He was taken prisoner twice, escaped twice, and yeah, he was a bit of a war hero. And he was called upon to do some very unpleasant clean-up tasks after the war was over. But do you think he would have done that? How do you think he would have felt if he knew that we were just going to roll over, kick our legs up in the air and surrender our sovereignty to a group of unelected people in some European country whose language nobody speaks? He wouldn't have liked it. Wouldn't have liked it at all. Now, this is the countryside that I remember as a child, and it's the kind of thing that always evokes in me a memory and a feeling about England. And I feel very patriotic when I see British countryside, albeit with chain link fences, and British people walking about. And by British people, I'm not excluding immigrants. There are immigrants and there are immigrants. A lot of immigrants wish to integrate into British culture and British life. There are some other immigrants, however, who refuse to do so, and they live in self-built ghettos in places like Hounslow, where the population is something like 65% Asian, and English is never heard on the streets. Never. I used to live near there. In the area where I am in Enfield, sometimes you can sit on a bus and you don't hear an English word spoken. You hear African languages, you hear German, you hear Danish, you hear French, not English. And there are some immigrants who've been here for 20 years and still can only say yes, no, please, pardon, thank you. And that is the sum total of their English after 20 years. Now, obviously they were planning to stay here for the rest of their lives, otherwise they would be here. Why would they be here for 20 years? The answer is they don't need to speak their own language. All they need to speak is the language that everyone around them speaks, and since everyone around them is from their own country, which is why they live in these little enclaves, and they have, incidentally, in many cases, their own schools, so their children don't even speak the English language very well, even if they were born over here. And those are the sort of immigrants that this country doesn't need and doesn't want. The sort of immigrants we want are the sort of people who work hard and contribute, and not just contribute financially but also contribute to British culture. So having said all that, those are all the reasons why I voted leave. And yeah, there's a financial upheaval, and guess what? I predicted exactly that would happen, and it's one reason I put my money into gold, and gold is now worth that I bought is now worth an awful lot more because the pound's gone down. So it's worth an awful lot more in pounds, but obviously the pound is worth less elsewhere. But to be honest, if someone said to me the currency is going to crash to zero, the stock market's going to go away, I would still have voted to leave. And this is one reason why the government scare stories didn't work, because people are well and truly fed up with the way things have been going in this country, and it's been happening that way for years, and people often talk about doing something about it, nothing ever gets done. Well, we're hoping now that things will happen. And Britain used to have a huge thriving industry. We were one of the world's industrial leaders, and then just like the United States, the government made the decision that it was okay to go for free trade, which meant that all the jobs go wherever in the world it's cheapest to hire someone, like China, like India, like all these places where earning $200 a month is considered a fantastic wage. And this is bad. This is obviously bad, because your industry collapses, your jobs go. When your jobs go, you can't afford to institute any sort of social policies. The income to your government starts to dry up from taxes, and also from other things like duty. Now, in the old days, we used to import lots and lots of different luxury items and a few staples, and on landing, all these luxury items had to pay something like a 20 to 30% tax, which went straight to the government. And guess what the government did with it? They invested it into British industry. They invested it into helping out factories and companies who they thought were worth saving. There was a recent closure of a big steel mill in Wales. Now, the steel mill was actually not making a huge loss, and it was actually a world leader, but the government decided, we don't like this nasty messy steel business, it's going to get closed down, and so it got closed down. Thousands of jobs were lost. In the days when we had import duty, that would not have happened. The government would have stepped in, they would have helped the steel works out, they would have bought some new equipment for it and arranged for it to be, the money to be paid back by the company over a number of years. And okay, at one time we had a lot of nationalised industries. Personally, I don't believe in nationalised industries, but I do believe that if the government helps out companies, then the companies ought to repay the government at some point in the future, and not just take it as a free handout like the banks have, for example. I think that sort of thing is entirely wrong, and the people involved should all have their pensions confiscated and their bank accounts terminated. I think that the whole way that Britain, America have gone about actually organising their countries' economies is all wrong, and personally my point of view is we should just stick it to the European Union and say, right, we voted out below Article 50, we're out now, we're breaking that treaty, because after all we have broken treaties before, nearly every country has. Now obviously the French and the Germans could decide to go to war with us, but seeing as we're a nuclear power, it's very, very unlikely. All that's going to happen is things are going to get a bit sticky, and the German car industry is going to lose about a quarter of its revenue, which comes from selling cars into England. And why does that come from selling cars into England? Because here in England we pay far, far more for German cars than anybody else in the world. So the profits are far, far higher. And in fact it means that they can afford to sell their cars in some markets at a loss to get market share, because we're overpaying by something like 22% for BMWs, Audis and Mercedes. So I say stuff them. We stop importing German cars, or we put a 35% tariff on imported German cars, and the government uses that money to build up a car industry in the UK again. And the same goes with other industries such as electronics. In Britain we made the world's very first televisions. John Logie Baird, just down the road.
Well, you could subscribe to Arduinotronic, or just go jump in a lake.